The Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke.
Christ.
Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his manager's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. They asked another, 'How much do you owe?' And he replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And when his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly, for the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever there is faithful in very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
No servant can serve two masters, for a servant will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Please be seated. In the late 1950s, a young rock climber named Yvon Chouinard pioneered a revolution in climbing equipment. Fed up with the expensive and environmentally damaging gear that he and his friends had to bring over from Europe, he went out and bought a used forge, taught himself how to blacksmith, and started hammering out pitons, the little rock gear that you tuck into crevices in order to hold the rope steady. And that gear would bring him and others to the tops of some of the most iconic climbs in America and around the world. Over the course of the next 60 years, that special-made gear that he sold at cost to his friends would grow into a multi-billion-dollar business. Yvon Chouinard went on to found Patagonia. And until a few days ago, he still owned it. Then he gave it away. Patagonia was never a typical corporation. It was founded in the 60s and 70s along the lines of the sort of dirtbag ethos that saw gear and clothing as means to an end. That end being spending less time indoors and more time outside, exploring, adventuring in far-flung places, both in America and around the world. And Chouinard was not a typical founder or owner. He would disappear for up to half the year, climbing, surfing, fishing, kayaking, somewhere, anywhere off the grid. That company that he founded would grow rapidly in the late 80s and early 90s, but eventually would make this turn where it began being marketed more as a lifestyle brand than a company with those origins in outdoor activity itself. Seeing that the company he founded to equip people to engage more fully with the outdoors, becoming more driven by profits than ideology, Chouinard and Patagonia went in a new direction. They started swimming upstream against the logics of their industry and conventional business wisdom. They started off by donating 1% of all their profits to grassroots environmental organizations. They placed full-page ads in newspapers telling people not to buy their jackets. They tried to devise ways to stop growing. And in the most shocking move yet, this past week, Yvon Chouinard gave the company away. He signed it over to a nonprofit that will use Patagonia's profits, every cent that the corporation earns, to combat climate change and work with grassroots nonprofits and organizations to protect and restore natural areas. In short, Yvon Chouinard handed his wealth and his legacy over to the earth. Our readings today, both from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Scriptures, as well as from the Gospel, highlight the complicated yet vital relationship between God's people and material wealth. It begins in our reading from the prophet Amos. He sees the way that the people of Israel have turned against God, especially in how they deal with one another. He criticizes those who trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land. He sees around him incredible wealth disparity, where wealth and goods are held by a select few who use those resources to exploit the poor and to further enrich themselves, leaving God's people hungry and acting against God's laws. God did not intend the wealth of the land to be hoarded by a few, but to be a resource shared among the people of Israel, that they might live and be fed from it. The riches of the land were for the upbuilding of the community, not personal enrichment at the expense of that same community. And our gospel reading further explores that relationship between the people of God and material wealth. We hear this enigmatic parable about a master and a steward. The master calls the steward before him and threatens to fire him, does fire him, and the steward goes out and goes to the people indebted to the master and collects less than what they owe from him. And then, in a twist at the end, the master ends up praising the steward for his shrewdness. If you're confused what you're supposed to make of that, join the club. There's about 2,000 years of biblical scholars and preachers who have just kind of thrown up their hands and said, I don't really know. So you see where Luke has just kind of tacked on some additional sayings at the end that maybe have something to do with what the parable means. But it's a tricky one. It's a complicated one. And yet, I think there is this nugget within there that connects to what Amos is talking about and what those further sayings elucidate. The steward acts in a way, this manager acts in a way that seeks to preserve his relationship with those who are indebted to the master, instead of maximizing the amount he collects. Instead of perhaps taking his own cut off the top or charging them the interest that was banned for the people of Israel to charge, he instead offers them a break, forgives part of their debts, and then he himself is forgiven. He favors the relationship over any personal gain that he could get out of it, at least gain of wealth. Whatever we make of this parable, I think it does point to something that we hear throughout the Gospels, that wealth is something not to be valued in and of itself, that possessions are not things to be desired for their own sake. It points to the fact that all that we have and all that we are is a gift from God, and all that we have and all that we are finds its true purpose and meaning only when it's put in service of God. The thing that Jesus tells people almost more than any other is to give everything they have away so that they might serve God more fully. Luke's gospel puts that message in even starker terms in those sayings that follow the parable. No servant can serve two masters, for a servant will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. For followers of Jesus, wealth is not to be sought after for its own sake, to be hoarded, to be the thing around which our lives are oriented. The place that our material possessions have for followers of Jesus is as tools, as resources to enable us to live out the commandments at the heart of our faith, to love God and love our neighbors. Our material wealth is a resource, not something to cling to, something to steward, ready to give it up whenever we see that there is a need for it elsewhere. The early church relied on this attitude towards wealth for its very functioning, in order for this Jesus movement that they were a part of to get started. The community that Luke was writing to was a diverse one. Some of those who followed Christ had financial means. They came from wealthy upper-class backgrounds. But others came from nothing. They had nothing material, no wealth to contribute to the community. They came only with their hunger, their desire, their need for Jesus, their need for God's love to be poured into their lives. And so the community as a whole relied on those with means to live out their commitment to Christ and to use their resources not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the community. To follow Christ meant serving God with everything that they had, giving all they could to strengthen, to build a stronger and more resilient body of faith, and to support those who could not support themselves. Jesus called them to give everything in service of that higher mission. In the case of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard saw an opportunity to give his wealth away, to break the cycle of wealth just being used to generate more wealth for the one who already has it. He could have used his resources, he saw a way that he could use his resources in service of a higher goal. For him, that higher purpose was addressing climate change and environmental degradation. He understands that the wealth he has and the company he built has the potential to impact the world, but only if he's willing to give it away. For followers of Christ, our focus may not be so narrow. It may not be that sort of single issue, but is ultimately about how we serve God and serve our neighbor. And so to take this idea of what it means to give everything away, to give all that we have in service of something higher, takes on a higher meaning when it's put through this lens of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. What our gospel is talking about is that all our gifts, all our money, all our talents, all our time are things that can be used not for our own sake, but in service of God. In this parable and the sayings that follow, Jesus challenges his disciples to ask themselves what they want to serve. Will they serve their own interests, pursuing material comfort and wealth for its own sake? Or will they use everything that they have to love God and to build up God's church? The same questions are relevant for us today. How will I use all the things that I have? Will I play it safe with my resources? Will I give my time only sparingly when I have a little bit extra, when I see that open block in my calendar? Will I donate only what feels comfortable and easy? Will I follow Jesus, but only when it doesn't get in the way of those other things I want to do? Or Or will I give myself generously to God and my neighbors? Will I be bold in what I share and what I give? Will I spend time with those who need it whenever and wherever I see the need? Will I stretch myself to give financially beyond what is comfortable and easy, and follow Jesus wherever and whenever he calls me? Those same questions are true also for us as a church, as a body of faith. What are the resources that we have collectively, and how will we use them? Are we just here to keep the lights on and the doors open? Are we just here to provide a space for the people who are already gathering here? Or will we use the resources that we have, talents, time, treasure in this room, to spread Jesus' gospel of love beyond these walls and out into the world? Will we use what we have not for our own sake, but for the sake of God's boundless love? This is the question at the heart of our readings. What will your life serve? Will you serve God, or will you serve your own comfort and security? The gospel of Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection, remind us that our highest calling is not in playing it safe, but in believing in the possibility of a transformed world, a world in which the poor are no longer exploited for the sake of the rich, a world where wealth does not just exist to generate more wealth, a world where we live in relationship with the earth itself rather than having dominion over it or domination over it, and a world where God's people offer all that they have to build up one another in love. That is Jesus' invitation to us. That is his challenge today.